The gunshot that shattered the dawn silence sent a flock of startled crows into the pale Wyoming sky as Isabella Walker crouched behind the overturned wagon, her trembling hands clutching a silver locket, the last remnant of a life now gone. It was 1876, and the unforgiving plains of the Wyoming Territory offered little mercy to a woman alone. The bullet had been meant for her, she was certain. 3 days since fleeing Cheyenne, and Frank Jenkins' men had finally caught up. Isabella pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the morning chill bit through her thin dress. Her provisions were gone, her horse dead from exhaustion the previous evening. And now this trapped between the vast emptiness of the prairie and men who would sooner see her dead than free. "Come on out, Mrs. Jenkins," a gruff voice called. "Your husband's mighty concerned about your welfare." Isabella almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Frank Jenkins had never been concerned about anything except his mining interests and maintaining his reputation as the most feared businessman in Cheyenne. The bruises still fading on her ribs told the true story of his concern. Another shot rang out, splintering wood mere inches from her head. Isabella ducked lower, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She wasn't going back. Death seemed a preferable alternative to returning to that man who had purchased her from her debt-ridden father with promises of security that had quickly revealed themselves as a prison of cruelty and control. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her blood run cold. But instead of coming from the direction of her pursuers, these came from the west fast and determined. Isabella risked a glance over the edge of the wagon. A lone rider approached at a gallop, silhouetted against the rising sun. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who belonged in this wild country, his horse responding to the slightest shift of weight as they navigated the uneven terrain. The stranger pulled his mount to a halt between Isabella's position and the 3 men who had been pursuing her. "That's far enough, gentlemen," the newcomer called out, his voice carrying a quiet authority that somehow seemed more threatening than any shout could have been. Isabella couldn't see his face clearly beneath the wide brim of his hat, but she could make out broad shoulders, a dust-covered duster, and the unmistakable outline of a holstered revolver resting against his hip. "This ain't your business, cowboy," one of Jenkins' men called back. "We're just retrieving a man's wayward wife." "Is that so?" The stranger's horse shifted beneath him, but he kept it under control with practiced ease. "And does retrieving normally involve shooting at unarmed women?" The 3 men spread out slightly, a tactical move that didn't escape the cowboy's notice. His hand hovered near his weapon, though he hadn't drawn it yet. "Last chance to ride away with your hide intact," threatened the apparent leader of Jenkins' men. The cowboy didn't move. "Funny. I was about to say the same to you." What happened next occurred so quickly that Isabella could hardly follow it. The first man drew his pistol, but the cowboy's weapon seemed to materialize in his hand as if by magic. 2 shots rang out in rapid succession, and 2 of Jenkins' men fell from their saddles. The third managed to fire once before a third shot from the cowboy's revolver found its mark, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The sudden violence ended as quickly as it had begun, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the nervous whickering of the horses and the distant cry of a hawk. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, checking each of the fallen men with methodical efficiency. Isabella remained frozen behind her meager shelter, uncertain if she had escaped one danger only to encounter another. Finally, the stranger approached her position, his gun now holstered. He stopped a respectful distance away and removed his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind but not unkind. His eyes were a startling shade of blue against his tanned skin, and a week's worth of stubble covered his jaw. He couldn't have been more than 30. "They won't be troubling you anymore, madam," he said, his voice gentler now. "Are you hurt?" Isabella slowly rose from her hiding place, her legs unsteady beneath her. "No, thank you, you saved my life." He nodded once, then glanced at the broken wagon and her pitiful collection of belongings scattered across the ground. Looks like you've had a rough go of it. Those men, they were after you specifically. My husband sent them. The word husband tasted bitter on her tongue. Former husband, if I have any say in the matter. The cowboy studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, the dark circles under her eyes, and the fading bruise on her cheekbone that her bonnet couldn't quite hide. Name's Ike West, he finally said. Most folks call me Ike. Isabella Walker, she replied, deliberately using her maiden name. Though I've been going by Mrs. Jenkins these past 2 years. Ike nodded toward the horizon. I've got a small cattle operation about half a day's ride west of here, heading back that way now. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. Where are you bound for, Mrs. Walker? Isabella glanced around at the vast emptiness surrounding them, feeling the full weight of her isolation. I don't know, she admitted. Away from Cheyenne, away from Frank Jenkins, beyond that. She shrugged, the hopelessness of her situation suddenly overwhelming. Ike looked at the dead men, then back at her. More will come. A man like Jenkins doesn't give up easily on what he considers his property. I know, she whispered. Ike replaced his hat and ran a hand along his horse's neck, seeming to come to some decision. My ranch is small, but it's remote. Could be a safe place while you figure out your next move. Why would you help me? You don't know me. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Maybe I've got a weakness for lost causes, Mrs. Walker. His expression grew serious again, or maybe I've seen enough of men who treat women like possessions. Isabella hesitated, weighing her limited options. Trust didn't come easily after what she'd endured, but death or capture awaited her if she remained alone on the prairie. Ike seemed to sense her uncertainty. I've got a housekeeper, Flora Mendez, been with me since I started the ranch. She'd welcome the company, I expect. He gestured toward the empty plains. But it's your choice. I won't force you. The sincerity in his eyes decided her. Whatever risks this stranger presented, they paled in comparison to the certainty of what awaited her if Jenkins' men caught up to her. I have nothing to offer in return, she said. Ike collected her scattered belongings, securing them to his saddle. Not asking for anything, he extended a hand toward her. So, what'll it be? Isabella took a deep breath and reached for his outstretched hand. I accept your offer, Mr. West. He helped her mount his horse, settling her in the saddle before climbing up behind her. Then you'll come with me, he said simply, as if offering shelter to a hunted woman was an everyday occurrence. As they rode away from the scene of violence, leaving the broken wagon and 3 bodies behind, Isabella felt a strange mix of fear and hope. She had no idea what awaited her at this cowboy's ranch, but for the first time in years, she had made a choice of her own free will. The vastness of the Wyoming territory stretched before them, harsh and beautiful in the morning light. Isabella closed her eyes briefly, feeling the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her and the solid presence of the man behind her. Whatever happened next, she was no longer alone. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the landscape gradually changing as they left the open prairie and entered more rugged country. Low hills rose around them, dotted with stunted pines and rocky outcroppings. A creek glittered in the distance, its banks lined with cottonwoods whose leaves shimmered silver in the breeze. That water feeds my property, Ike said, breaking the silence. Not much, but enough to keep cattle watered year-round, makes all the difference out here. Isabella nodded, grateful for the neutral conversation. How long have you had your ranch? Going on 5 years now. Started with just 20 head of cattle and a run-down cabin. There was quiet pride in his voice. Up to nearly 200 head now, and the cabin's a proper house. Small but solid. You've built it all yourself, had help. My foreman, Joseph Green, and a couple of ranch hands, good men. He adjusted his hold on the reins, and Flora, of course, she keeps us all in line. Isabella found herself curious about this man who had risked his life for a stranger. Were you always a rancher? Ike was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice had lost some of its ease. No, rode with the Union cavalry during the war. After that, I drifted, did some scouting for the army, some hunting, even tried my hand at prospecting." He paused. "Nothing stuck until I found this piece of land. Something about it just felt right." The simplicity of his answer resonated with her. Finding a place that felt right wasn't that what everyone was searching for. "What about you?" he asked. "You're a long way from anywhere. How'd you end up in these parts?" Isabella sighed, deciding that if she was to accept this man's help, honesty was the least she could offer. "My father was a doctor in St. Louis. After my mother died, he changed, started drinking, gambling. I was 19 when he lost everything. Frank Jenkins was a business associate who offered to clear my father's debts in exchange for my hand in marriage." She felt Ike stiffen slightly behind her but continued. "It seemed like the only option at the time. Father would be saved from prison and I would have security. Jenkins was wealthy, respected, I thought." She shook her head. "It doesn't matter what I thought. The reality was very different." "And your father?" Ike asked quietly. "Dead 6 months after the wedding. Pneumonia, they said, but I think he simply lost the will to live once he realized what kind of man he had sold me to." Isabella swallowed hard. "Jenkins brought me west when he acquired mining interests in Cheyenne. I've been planning my escape for months, saving what little money I could, waiting for him to leave on business." "What changed? Why run now?" Isabella's hand unconsciously went to her stomach, a gesture not lost on Ike. "I couldn't bring a child into that house," she said softly. "Not with him." Ike said nothing for several moments, and Isabella feared she had revealed too much. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "No one from my ranch will return you to Jenkins. You have my word on that." "Thank you," she whispered, feeling tears threaten. She blinked them away, determined not to break down now. They crested a rise, and suddenly the landscape opened up before them. A small valley spread out below, cradled by low hills. A modest ranch house stood near the creek, smoke rising from its chimney. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, bunkhouse, and what looked like a smithy. In the distance, cattle grazed on the sparse grass of early spring. "West Range," Ike said. "Not much, but it's home." To Isabella, who had spent the last 2 years in a grand but coldly oppressive house in Cheyenne, the small ranch looked like paradise. Chickens scratched in a yard, a vegetable garden was visible behind the main house, and the entire scene had an air of humble prosperity that spoke of hard work rather than exploitation. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun. She was middle-aged, with dark hair streaked with silver pulled back in a practical bun, and wore a simple dress covered by an apron. "That's Flora," Ike said. "Fair warning, she runs this place more than I do." They dismounted in the yard, and Flora approached with open curiosity. Her dark eyes took in Isabella's bedraggled appearance with a quick, assessing glance that missed nothing. "Ike West, you were supposed to be back yesterday," she said, her accent revealing her Mexican heritage. "And now you bring company without warning." Ike removed his hat. "Sorry, Flora." "Got delayed." He turned to Isabella. "This is Mrs. Isabella Walker. She's in need of a safe place to stay for a while." Flora's expression softened immediately. "Safe place, HM." She looked more closely at the fading bruise on Isabella's cheek, then nodded once, decisively. "Well then, you've come to the right place, Mrs. Walker. Come inside, you look dead on your feet." Isabella found herself ushered into the ranch house with surprising speed. The interior was simple but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, solid wooden furniture that showed signs of careful craftsmanship, and windows that let in plenty of light. Everything was spotlessly clean, with touches that spoke of a woman's presence: embroidered cushions on the chairs, dried flowers arranged in a vase, and the smell of fresh bread in the air. "Sit, sit," Flora insisted, guiding Isabella to a chair by the fire. "I'll heat some water for you to wash, and there's stew from last night we can warm up." "I don't want to be a burden," Isabella began, but Flora waved her objections away. Nonsense. Any friend of Ike's is welcome here. She gave Isabella a knowing look. And any woman running from trouble has my sympathy, no questions asked. Isabella felt a rush of gratitude toward this practical, no-nonsense woman who seemed to understand her situation without needing the details spelled out. Ike had remained near the door, seeming slightly out of place in this domestic scene despite it being his own home. "I'll see to the horse," he said. "Then I need to talk to Joseph about those men who might come looking." Flora nodded. "Go, I'll take care of Mrs. Walker." After Ike left, Flora set about heating water on the cook stove and preparing a bowl of stew. She worked efficiently, talking as she moved. The men are usually out with the cattle during the day, just Ike, Joseph, and two hands, Miguel and Liam, simple folk but good. They won't bother you. "Thank you for your kindness," Isabella said, watching the older woman. "Mr. West said you've been with him since he started the ranch." Flora smiled. "Yes, my husband worked for the previous owner of this land. When he died, Ike gave me a place here." She set a steaming bowl in front of Isabella. "Eat, then we'll get you cleaned up and find you some fresh clothes." The stew was simple but delicious chunks of venison with potatoes, carrots, and herbs. Isabella hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful, and then she had to remind herself to eat slowly, like the lady she had been raised to be. "Ike doesn't bring people home," Flora commented as she arranged some clothing she had retrieved from a chest. "Especially not women." Isabella paused with the spoon halfway to her mouth. "I assure you it's not. That is, Mr. West and I are not." Flora laughed softly. "I know that, child. Ike West is many things, but he's not the type to take advantage. I only meant that he must have had a good reason to bring you here." "He's a private man. He saved my life," Isabella said simply. "My husband's men would have killed me or worse, brought me back to him." Flora nodded, unsurprised. "Bad marriage, the worst mistake of my life." "And now," Flora gestured vaguely toward Isabella's midsection. Isabella set down her spoon, no longer able to pretend an appetite. "Now I'm trying to ensure it's not my child's life as well." Flora's expression was full of compassion, but devoid of pity, a distinction Isabella appreciated. "You'll be safe here for as long as you need," the older woman assured her. "No one will find you, and if they do, they'll have to get through Ike and the boys first. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Trouble comes whether invited or not," Flora said philosophically. "Better to face it among friends than alone." She gathered up a basin and the heated water. "Now, let's get you washed up. I've set out some of my daughter's clothes. She's married and living in Denver now. They should fit you well enough for now." An hour later, Isabella felt like a new woman. Washed, dressed in a simple but clean calico dress, and with her hair neatly braided, she looked more like the respectable doctor's daughter she had once been, and less like a desperate fugitive. Flora had insisted she rest, showing her to a small but neat bedroom that apparently belonged to her absent daughter. "Sleep," Flora ordered. "Everything looks better after rest." Despite her racing thoughts, exhaustion overcame Isabella as soon as her head touched the pillow. She fell into a deep sleep, the first untroubled slumber she had experienced in months. She awoke to the sound of men's voices from the main room of the house. The light coming through the window had changed. It was late afternoon. Isabella rose, smoothed her borrowed dress, and took a deep breath before opening the door. 4 men sat at the large table, deep in conversation. Ike looked up first, his expression softening slightly when he saw her. "Mrs. Walker," he acknowledged. "Hope we didn't wake you." "Not at all," she assured him. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." A weathered man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair rose from his seat. "Joseph Green, madam, foreman of this outfit." His handshake was firm but respectful. The other 2 men introduced themselves as Miguel Reyes and Liam O'Brien, both ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. Miguel was younger, perhaps 25, with a ready smile, while Liam was closer to 30, with the red hair and freckles of his Irish heritage. "Ike's been telling us about your situation," Joseph said once the introductions were complete. Want to assure you that we'll all be keeping an eye out for any strangers in these parts. I appreciate that, Mr. Green, but I don't expect you to risk yourselves for me. Miguel grinned. Wouldn't be the West if there wasn't a bit of risk, Senora. Liam nodded in agreement. Besides, it'll liven things up around here. Gets mighty dull watching cows graze. Their easy acceptance and lack of prying questions surprised Isabella. These men, virtual strangers, were willing to protect her without demanding her full story or extracting promises in return. It was so unlike the transactional relationships she had known in Cheyenne society, where every favor came with strings attached. Flora emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. If you're finished with your war council, dinner is ready. Mrs. Walker needs to eat. She's got more than herself to think about now. The men cleared the table with practiced efficiency, and soon they were all seated around it as Flora served a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and green beans from last year's garden that had been preserved for winter. The conversation flowed naturally, with the men discussing ranch business and plans for the spring calving season. They included Isabella without making her the center of attention, a courtesy she deeply appreciated. As the meal progressed, Isabella found herself studying Ike when he wasn't looking. In the familiar setting of his home, surrounded by people he trusted, he seemed more relaxed than he had been on the trail. He spoke little, but when he did, the others listened. There was a natural authority about him that required no bluster or intimidation, the exact opposite of Frank Jenkins' bullying approach to leadership. After dinner, Joseph produced a worn deck of cards, and the men engaged in a friendly game while Flora insisted on Isabella helping her with the washing up to keep your mind occupied, as she put it. They're good men, Flora said quietly as they worked side by side. Loyal to Ike. They'll keep their word about protecting you. Isabella nodded, watching through the kitchen doorway as Ike dealt a new hand of cards. Mr. West, he doesn't seem like the typical rancher. Flora smiled knowingly, because he isn't. Ike came west with ghosts following him, same as many men after the war, but unlike most, he found a way to live with them rather than drown them in whiskey or violence. She handed Isabella a plate to dry. He built something here, something honest, that matters in this country. Later, as the men prepared to return to the bunkhouse for the night, Ike drew Isabella aside. We'll ride into Douglas tomorrow, nearest town, about 3 hours from here. Need to report those men I shot, and we should get you some proper clothes and whatever else you need. Is it safe? What if someone recognizes me? Douglas is small, but it's not so small that strangers are unusual. Railroads brought plenty of new faces. Besides, Jenkins' influence doesn't reach that far. He's focused on Cheyenne and the mines. Isabella considered this. If you're certain. I am. And we need to establish your presence here. Secrets have a way of festering. He hesitated, then added, we'll say you're my widowed cousin, come to help Flora with the house. Gives you a reason to be here without raising eyebrows. The practical solution impressed her. Thank you, Mr. West. For everything, he nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Get some rest, Mrs. Walker. We'll leave after breakfast. As Isabella returned to her borrowed room, she felt an unfamiliar sensation blossoming in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope, cautious and fragile, but present nonetheless. For the first time since her disastrous marriage, she had allies. She wasn't alone anymore. Morning came with the scent of coffee and bacon. Isabella dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes, pinning her hair in a simple style that Flora had shown her. When she emerged into the main room, only Ike was present, seated at the table with a steaming cup before him. He stood when she entered, that innate courtesy again surprising her. Morning, Flora's gathering eggs. Help yourself to coffee. Isabella poured herself a cup, appreciating the rich aroma. Good coffee had been one of the few luxuries in her marriage that she had genuinely enjoyed. Thank you. Are we still planning to go to Douglas today? If you're feeling up to it, she nodded. I am. The rest did me good. They fell into a comfortable silence as Flora returned with fresh eggs and began preparing breakfast. The domestic scene felt oddly natural, as if Isabella had been part of this household for months rather than a single day. After a hearty breakfast, Isabella found herself once again on Ike's horse, though this time they rode side by side, as Flora had insisted she take her daughter's mare. She's just eating hay and getting fat otherwise. The journey to Douglas passed pleasantly. The day was clear and mild, typical of early spring in Wyoming, and Ike proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local history. Isabella found herself relaxing in his company, drawn to his quiet strength and unassuming manner. Douglas was indeed small compared to Cheyenne, but it had the essential businesses of any frontier town: a general store, a bank, a hotel with an attached restaurant, a livery stable, and of course, a saloon. The arrival of the railroad a few years earlier had brought new life to what had once been little more than a trading post. Their first stop was the sheriff's office, where Ike reported the shooting with straightforward honesty. Sheriff Thomas Davis was a pragmatic man who had held his position through a combination of fairness and firm handling of troublemakers. Self-defense, clear as day, he concluded after hearing Ike's account. 3 against 1, and they drew first. No law against protecting yourself or a lady in distress. He nodded toward Isabella, who had been introduced as Ike's widowed cousin. Sorry for your troubles, madam. Glad Ike was there to help. As am I, Isabella replied softly. Those men were working for Frank Jenkins out of Cheyenne, Ike added, watching the sheriff's reaction closely. Might be others looking. Sheriff Davis's expression hardened slightly. Jenkins heard stories about him, none of them good. He stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Well, his reach ends at my town limits. If any more of his men come sniffing around Douglas, they'd best behave themselves. After leaving the sheriff's office, they visited the general store, where Ike insisted that Isabella select fabric for new dresses, along with other necessities she would need. Despite her protests about the expense, he was firm. Consider it an advance on your help with the ranch, he said. Flora could use another pair of hands, especially with calving season coming. Isabella recognized the offer for what it was: a way to allow her to maintain her dignity while accepting his help. In that case, I accept, though I should warn you my knowledge of ranching is non-existent. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Flora will teach you what you need to know. She's a patient teacher most of the time. They took lunch at the hotel restaurant, a relatively refined establishment by frontier standards. As they ate, Isabella became aware of curious glances from other patrons. A single woman in the company of a rancher was noteworthy in a small town like Douglas. People are staring, she murmured. Let them, Ike replied, unconcerned. Better they see you openly as my cousin than hear whispers about a mysterious woman hidden at West Range. You've thought of everything, he shrugged. Just practical. Spend enough time in small towns to know how they work. Their meal was interrupted by the arrival of a tall, elegantly dressed man who approached their table with the confident air of someone accustomed to respect. West, he greeted Ike with a nod before turning his attention to Isabella. And who might this lovely lady be? I don't believe we've had the pleasure. Isabella instinctively disliked the man's appraising gaze, but she maintained her polite smile as Ike made the introductions. Finley James, this is my cousin, Isabella Walker, recently widowed and come to help at the ranch. Isabella, Mr. James owns the bank here in Douglas. Finley James made a show of sympathy. My condolences on your loss, Mrs. Walker. Though I must say, West Range's fortunes have certainly improved with your arrival. The banker's charm felt calculated to Isabella, reminiscent of the way Frank Jenkins had courted her initially. Thank you, Mr. James. I'm grateful for my cousin's hospitality during this difficult time. If there's anything you need while in Douglas, please don't hesitate to call upon me. James handed her a calling card with a flourish. The bank offers many services to newcomers to our fine community. That's kind of you, Isabella replied, accepting the card while having no intention of using it. After James departed with another lingering glance at Isabella, Ike's expression was unreadable. James has been trying to buy parcels of land around Douglas for years. Sees himself as a future cattle baron. He reminds me of my husband, Isabella said quietly, all surface charm covering something much less pleasant. Ike nodded. Good instincts, he's not to be trusted. He hesitated, then added, he's been particularly interested in West Range since I secured water rights to the creek. Will he cause trouble? Nothing I can't handle. Ike signaled for the check. We should head back soon. Don't like leaving the ranch short-handed for too long. Their return journey was less conversational, both lost in their own thoughts. By the time they reached West Range, the sun was lowering toward the western hills, bathing the modest ranch in golden light. To Isabella's surprise, it already felt somewhat like coming home. The days that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. True to her word, Flora took Isabella under her wing, teaching her the domestic aspects of running a ranch, cooking for hungry men, preserving food, tending the garden, and managing the small flock of chickens. Isabella proved a quick study, eager to be useful. The physical labor was a welcome change from the idle existence she had led as Jenkins' wife, where her primary duties had been to look ornamental and entertain his business associates. Here, every task had purpose and contributed directly to the well-being of the household. Ike maintained a respectful distance, busy with the demands of the ranch, but Isabella often felt his eyes on her when he thought she wasn't looking. She found herself equally curious about him, this quiet man who had risked his life for a stranger and now offered her sanctuary without expectation of reward. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Isabella sat on the porch after dinner, enjoying the cool night air. The vast Wyoming sky spread above her, scattered with stars so numerous and bright they seemed close enough to touch. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her contemplation, and she turned to find Ike holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might like some," he said, offering one to her. "Thank you." She accepted the cup gratefully, the warmth welcome against the night chill. "It's beautiful here, so peaceful." Ike settled into the chair beside her, his long legs stretched out before him. "Different from Cheyenne, I imagine." "Completely." She sipped her coffee. There, everything was about appearances, about showing your wealth and influence. Here, she gestured toward the darkened landscape. Here, none of that matters. They sat in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Isabella gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Mr. West, Ike, why did you really help me that day? The truth." He considered her question, taking his time as was his habit. "Saw something in your eyes," he finally said, "something I recognized." "What was that?" "Determination. Will to survive." He turned to look at her, his expression serious in the dim light from the house windows. "Seen plenty of desperate people in my time. Most are just running from something. You were running toward something, freedom, I reckon." "Couldn't just ride past that." His insight startled her. "That's perceptive," Ike shrugged. "Just observation." He paused. "Been meaning to ask you something too. What's your plan now? Can't hide at West Range forever." Isabella sighed, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "In truth, I haven't thought beyond escaping Jenkins and protecting this child. I have some money saved, not much, but enough to perhaps start over somewhere far from here. California, maybe, and the child's father," Ike asked carefully. "Does he have a say in this?" "Frank Jenkins is not a father," Isabella replied, her voice hardening. "He's the man who forced himself on his wife, as was his legal right. This child deserves better than to be raised by such a man." Ike's expression darkened, and his hand tightened on his coffee cup. "I see." "I'm sorry for speaking so plainly," Isabella said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's not a proper topic of conversation. Don't apologize for honesty." Ike's voice was gentle. "Not with me." They fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now, heavier, filled with unspoken understanding. Finally, Ike stood. "Whatever you decide, you have time to think here. No need to rush." He hesitated, then added, "And if you choose to stay longer than you planned, that would be acceptable." With that cryptic statement, he bid her good night and returned to the house, leaving Isabella to ponder his words and the strange warmth they had kindled in her chest. As spring progressed into early summer, Isabella found herself increasingly integrated into the life of West Range. The ranch hands treated her with a protective courtesy that touched her deeply, and Flora had become a true friend and confidante. Even Joseph, initially reserved, had warmed to her presence, especially after she had helped deliver a difficult calf when everyone else was occupied elsewhere. Her condition was becoming more noticeable now, though the loose-fitting dresses Flora had helped her sew disguised it somewhat. No one mentioned it directly, but accommodations were quietly made, heavier tasks were taken from her hands without comment, and her afternoon rest became an accepted part of the daily routine. Most surprising to Isabella was her evolving relationship with Ike. Though always respectful of her space and independence, he sought her company more frequently, inviting her on short rides to check on the herd, bringing books from his modest collection when he learned of her love of reading, or simply joining her on the porch in the evenings to watch the sunset. They talked of many things during these quiet moments together: his experiences during the war, her childhood in St. Louis, books they had both read, and their observations about the changing seasons. What they did not discuss was the future, or the growing attachment that both seemed to feel but neither acknowledged openly. One bright June morning, Isabella was hanging laundry when she heard riders approaching. Her heart immediately accelerated. Despite the weeks of peace, the fear of Jenkins' men had never entirely left her. She turned to see Joseph riding hard toward the house, followed by Miguel. "Riders coming," Joseph called out as soon as he was within earshot. 6 men, well armed. Heading this way with purpose. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "Jenkins," she whispered. Flora appeared beside her, jaw set in determination. "Inside now, I'll get the shotgun." "Where's Ike?" Isabella asked as Joseph dismounted. "Western pasture with Liam." "I sent Miguel to fetch him." Joseph checked the revolver at his hip. "Go inside, Mrs. Walker, we'll handle this." Isabella obeyed, but paused at the window, watching as Joseph positioned himself in front of the house. Flora joined her, a double-barreled shotgun in her capable hands. "This was inevitable," the older woman said calmly. "Men like Jenkins don't let go easily." "I can't let you all risk yourselves for me," Isabella protested. "Perhaps if I just speak to them." "Absolutely not." Flora's tone brooked no argument. "Ike would never forgive us if we let you face them." The approaching riders came into view, 5 rough-looking men, led by a figure Isabella recognized with a jolt of terror. Not a hired gun, but Frank Jenkins himself, immaculately dressed despite the dust of travel, his expression as coldly determined as she remembered. "He came himself," she whispered, one hand protectively covering her now visible pregnancy. "Good," Flora said grimly. "Saves Ike the trouble of hunting him down later." The riders drew up in front of the house, forming a loose semicircle. Frank Jenkins surveyed the modest ranch with obvious disdain before fixing his gaze on Joseph. "I'm looking for my wife," he announced without preamble. "Isabella Jenkins. I have reason to believe she's here." Joseph's expression remained impassive. "No one by that name at West Range, mister." "Don't play games with me, Cowboy," Jenkins snapped. "I know she's here. 3 of my men tracked her this far before they were murdered." "Self-defense isn't murder," Joseph replied evenly. "And I suggest you move on. This is private property." Jenkins' face flushed with anger. "Do you have any idea who I am? I own half of Cheyenne. One word from me, and this pathetic excuse for a ranch will be burned to the ground." "This isn't Cheyenne," came a new voice, and Isabella's heart leaped as Ike rode into the yard, Miguel and Liam flanking him. "Your influence doesn't reach here, Jenkins." Jenkins turned to face the newcomer, sizing him up with a practiced eye. "You must be West, the man who killed my employees." They drew on me first, Ike replied calmly, dismounting and handing his reins to Liam. After they shot at an unarmed woman. My wife is my concern, not yours, Jenkins retorted. She's stolen from me, humiliated me publicly with her disappearance, and now I find she's hiding with a common rancher. His lip curled in disgust. Step aside and let me reclaim what's mine, or there will be consequences. Isabella could remain silent no longer. Despite Flora's protests, she stepped onto the porch, her head held high. I'm not your property, Frank. Jenkins' attention snapped to her, and his expression changed from anger to shock as he registered her condition. So that's it, he said, his voice dangerously soft. You've been whoring yourself to this saddle tramp. Watch your mouth, Ike warned, his hand moving to rest on his holstered revolver. Jenkins ignored him, his focus entirely on Isabella. Did you think I wouldn't find you? That you could humiliate me like this and escape consequence? His face contorted with rage. You're coming home, Isabella, now. This is my home, she replied, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. I'm never going back to you. You have no choice, Jenkins snarled. The law is on my side. You're my wife, and that, he jabbed a finger toward her stomach, if it's even mine, is legally my child. Before Isabella could respond, Ike stepped between them. She's staying here, Jenkins. Leave while you still can. Jenkins laughed, an ugly sound devoid of humor. 5 armed men against 3 ranch hands. Those aren't odds I'd bet on, West. 6, came Flora's voice as she emerged from the house, shotgun in hand. And I rarely miss. For a tense moment, no one moved. Isabella held her breath, terrified that violence would erupt at any second. Then, unexpectedly, the sound of more approaching horses broke the standoff. All heads turned to see Sheriff Davis riding toward them, accompanied by 2 deputies. Heard we might have trouble out here, the sheriff called as he approached. Seems I heard right. Jenkins' expression shifted to one of calculated charm. Sheriff, I'm glad you're here. This man, he pointed at Ike, has abducted my wife and is holding her against her will. Sheriff Davis dismounted slowly, surveying the scene. Is that so? He turned to Isabella. Madam. Is this man your husband? Isabella straightened her spine. Legally, yes, but I left him of my own free will, Sheriff. Mr. West has offered me sanctuary, not imprisonment. She's distraught, Jenkins interjected. Pregnancy affects a woman's mind. As her husband, it's my duty to see her properly cared for. The sheriff's expression remained neutral as he turned to Ike. West, what's your take on this situation? Mrs. Walker came here seeking safety from a man who abused her, Ike said simply. I offered her a place to stay. She's free to leave whenever she chooses. Walker, Jenkins spat. Her name is Jenkins, not anymore, Isabella declared. I've resumed my maiden name, and I will never answer to Jenkins again. Sheriff Davis sighed heavily. I don't much care for domestic disputes. Usually messy with no clear right or wrong. He adjusted his hat thoughtfully, but I do care about keeping the peace in my county. Then do your duty, Jenkins demanded. Order this woman to return with her lawful husband. Can't do that, the sheriff replied, to Isabella's astonishment. Wyoming territory gives women more rights than you might be accustomed to, Mr. Jenkins, including the right to determine their own residence. This is absurd, Jenkins exploded. She's my wife, be that as it may. I won't force any woman to go with a man she claims mistreated her. Sheriff Davis's tone hardened. Now, I suggest you and your men turn around and head back to Cheyenne before this situation escalates further. Jenkins' face had gone an alarming shade of red. This isn't over, he snarled, jabbing a finger at Isabella. I'll be back with a court order. That child is mine by law, and I won't rest until I have what belongs to me. With that final threat, he wheeled his horse around and spurred it harshly, his men following in his wake. The tension in the yard didn't dissipate until they were well out of sight. Sheriff Davis turned to Ike. He meant what he said, West. A man like that has enough money to buy judges. You'd best be prepared. Ike nodded grimly. Appreciate the warning, Sheriff, and your timing. Davis mounted his horse. Just doing my job, though I'd be obliged if you'd avoid shooting any more of his men on my patch. Creates paperwork. His expression softened slightly as he glanced at Isabella. Good luck to you, madam. After the sheriff and his deputies had departed, Isabella found her legs would no longer support her. She sank onto the porch step, trembling with delayed reaction. He'll be back, she whispered, with a court order just as he said. Ike knelt before her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. Let him come, we'll be ready. Isabella looked up at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. I won't let him take my child, Ike. I'll run again if I have to. You won't have to run, he promised, taking her hands in his. Not ever again. In that moment, surrounded by people who had become her defenders and friends, Isabella allowed herself to believe him. For the first time since fleeing Cheyenne, she dared to hope that she might truly be free. The confrontation with Jenkins cast a shadow over West Range despite the bright summer days that followed. Extra precautions were taken. The men rode in pairs, rifles were kept close at hand, and someone always kept watch during the night. Isabella rarely ventured beyond the immediate vicinity of the ranch buildings, and never alone. Ike spent several days in Douglas, consulting with a lawyer about Isabella's legal situation. The news he returned with was mixed. Jenkins has filed divorce proceedings, he told her as they sat together on the porch one evening. But he's claiming abandonment and adultery as grounds which would give him rights to any child of the marriage. Isabella's hands trembled as she folded them protectively over her swollen abdomen. He knows the child is his. He just wants to punish me by taking it away. The lawyer thinks we have a strong counter-argument, Ike continued. If we can prove mistreatment, the territorial court might rule in your favor, especially given Wyoming's progressive attitudes toward women's rights. Prove mistreatment. It would be my word against his. Who would believe a wife over a respected businessman? Ike's expression darkened. We'll find a way. Meantime, the divorce proceedings will take months. The child will be born before anything's decided. Isabella closed her eyes briefly. And then what? We live in fear of him appearing with the law behind him. I can't bear it, Ike. There's another option, he said quietly. One the lawyer suggested. She looked at him questioningly. If you were to remarry quickly after the divorce is finalized, your new husband would have certain legal rights regarding the child, especially if, he hesitated, if what, if Jenkins' paternity could be questioned. Ike met her gaze steadily. The timing of your departure from Cheyenne and the child's birth could create reasonable doubt. Isabella stared at him, understanding slowly dawning. You're suggesting I lie about when the child was conceived, claim it belongs to someone else, not lie exactly, just allow for uncertainty. Ike's normally composed expression showed signs of discomfort with this conversation. It would strengthen your legal position considerably. And this hypothetical new husband, where would he come from? Isabella asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Ike looked away, focusing on the distant hills. It could be a marriage of convenience, for the child's sake. The offer hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge its full implications. Finally, Isabella broke the silence. That's a generous offer, Ike. But I couldn't ask that of you. You've done so much already. You didn't ask, I'm offering. He turned back to her, his blue eyes serious. Think about it. No need to decide now. Before she could respond, Flora called them in for dinner, and the moment passed. But Isabella couldn't stop thinking about Ike's suggestion, turning it over in her mind as she lay awake that night. A marriage of convenience, he had called it. Yet she couldn't help wondering if there might be more to his offer than simple practicality. The summer heat intensified as July gave way to August. Isabella's pregnancy advanced, making her increasingly uncomfortable in the dry, hot weather. Flora fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day and preparing special tonics meant to strengthen both mother and child. One sweltering afternoon, unable to bear the stuffiness of the house any longer, Isabella made her way to the creek that ran behind the property. A small stand of cottonwoods provided welcome shade, and she settled on a flat rock near the water's edge, removing her shoes to dangle her swollen feet in the cool current. The peacefulness of the spot worked its magic, and she found herself relaxing for the first time in days. The gentle sound of the flowing water nearly lulled her to sleep until a voice startled her back to alertness. "Thought I might find you here," Ike said, approaching from the direction of the barn. "Flora's looking for you, said you disappeared without a word." Isabella smiled apologetically. "I needed some air and coolness," she gestured to the water. The creek provided both. Ike settled beside her on the rock, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Can't blame you. House is like an oven today." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the play of sunlight on the water. Isabella was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the clean scent of his soap mingling with the inevitable dust of ranch work. The steady rhythm of his breathing, the occasional brush of his arm against hers as he shifted position. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said finally, keeping her gaze on the water. "The marriage of convenience." Ike remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "It's a practical solution to a difficult problem," she acknowledged, "but it would tie you to another man's child for life." "That's a heavy burden to ask anyone to bear." "Not a burden," Ike said quietly, "not if it's chosen freely." Isabella turned to look at him then, searching his face for any sign of reluctance or doubt. She found none, only the steady regard she had come to rely on. "Why, Ike? Why would you do this for me, for a child that isn't yours?" He considered his answer carefully, as he did with all important matters. "Started thinking about it that first day," he finally admitted, "when I saw you behind that wagon, outnumbered but still fighting." A smile touched his lips briefly. "Admired your spirit then, come to admire a lot more since, such as your kindness, your strength, the way you've made a place for yourself here despite everything." He looked away, seemingly embarrassed by his own words. "Way you are with Flora and the men. How you care for things that need caring for." Isabella felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "That hardly seems reason enough to tie yourself to me legally." "There's more," Ike said, his voice dropping lower, "but I'm not good with words, never have been." "Try," she urged softly. "Please." He turned to face her fully then, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Been alone a long time," he said. "Thought that was how it would stay. Then you came, and..." He shrugged, frustrated by his inability to express himself. "Everything changed." "Oh," Isabella whispered, understanding dawning. "Ike, are you saying I care for you?" he interrupted, the words coming more quickly now. "More than I meant to, more than makes sense, given everything. And I know your situation, know you're still legally married, expecting another man's child. Know you might not feel the same, but if there's a chance, even a small one." Isabella felt tears welling in her eyes. "I never thought I could trust a man again after Frank, never thought I'd want to." She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "But I trust you, Ike, and I care for you too." The hope that bloomed in his expression made him look younger, less weathered by life. "Then it wouldn't just be convenience," he said. "Not for me, nor for me," she admitted. "Though the timing is complicated." Ike's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "Life is complicated, doesn't mean we stop living it." Isabella laughed softly, amazed at how this normally taciturn man could suddenly become philosophical. "When did you get so wise?" "Not wisdom. Just learned the hard way that waiting for perfect timing means waiting forever." He hesitated, then asked, "So is that a yes, to considering it at least?" "Yes," she replied, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "If the divorce is granted, and if you're still sure then." "Yes." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the Wyoming hills, rare and beautiful in its intensity. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Ike leaned forward until his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Unlike the demanding, possessive kisses she had endured from Frank, this was an invitation tender and respectful of her choice. Isabella responded in kind, her free hand coming up to rest against his cheek as she returned the kiss with a sweetness that surprised her. When they finally pulled apart, both were slightly breathless. Ike rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. Been wanting to do that for a while, he confessed. Isabella smiled. I'm glad you finally did. The sound of Flora calling Isabella's name from the direction of the house broke the moment. Ike stood, helping Isabella to her feet with gentle care. Should get back before she sends out a search party, he said, though he seemed reluctant to end their time alone. Isabella nodded, slipping her feet back into her shoes. As they walked back toward the house, Ike's hand found hers again, and she marveled at how natural it felt, this simple connection that promised so much more. September brought cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn to the Wyoming landscape. It also brought word from the lawyer in Douglas that the divorce proceedings were advancing more quickly than anticipated. Frank Jenkins, it seemed, was eager to be free of the marriage, likely to pursue another advantageous alliance, but remained adamant about claiming rights to the child. He's offered a settlement, Ike explained to Isabella after returning from town. Full divorce with no contest if you relinquish all claims to his property and fortune. I want nothing of his, she replied immediately. He can keep every penny. And he's dropped the adultery claim, which helps your reputation, Ike continued, but he's still insisting on paternal rights. Isabella's hand went protectively to her stomach, now prominently rounded as she entered her 8th month. Never. I'll fight him to my last breath on that, Ike nodded, having expected no less. Lawyers preparing our counter-offer. Full relinquishment of his paternal rights in exchange for your complete silence about his treatment of you during the marriage. His reputation means that much to him, in business circles, yes. Especially with the railroad executives he's courting for investment. Ike's expression was grimly satisfied. He values his good name more than a child he's never seen. We can use that. Isabella considered this strategy. It might work. Frank has always cared more about appearances than substance. She sighed, rubbing her lower back where the constant ache had settled. I just want it over with, Ike. I want to be free of him completely. You will be, he promised, gently guiding her to a chair and kneeling to massage her swollen feet, a tender routine he had developed in recent weeks. One way or another, you will be. Their relationship had deepened since that day by the creek, though both were careful to maintain propriety given Isabella's still married state and the watchful eyes of a small community. Yet there was no hiding the change between them, the lingering glances, the casual touches, the way they sought each other's company at every opportunity. Flora observed these developments with quiet approval, while Joseph and the ranch hands exchanged knowing looks but kept their comments to themselves. In many ways, it felt as though Isabella and Ike were already a family, awaiting only the formalities that would make it official. October arrived with unexpected news. A telegram from the lawyer informed them that Frank Jenkins had suddenly agreed to relinquish all claims to the unborn child in exchange for Isabella's silence about the marriage. The divorce would be finalized within weeks. Why the sudden change? Isabella wondered as she and Ike discussed the development. What made him give up so easily? Ike's expression was suspiciously neutral. Can't say for certain. Maybe he realized fighting would cost more than it was worth. Isabella narrowed her eyes. Ike West, what did you do? He shrugged, not quite meeting her gaze. Might have had Joseph make some inquiries in Cheyenne, and might have discovered some business practices Jenkins wouldn't want examined too closely. You blackmailed him. Prefer to think of it as leveraging information. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Man like Jenkins understands that language better than appeals to decency. Isabella wasn't sure whether to be horrified or grateful. You took a terrible risk. He could have retaliated against the ranch. Worth the risk, Ike said simply. For you. For the child, she shook her head but couldn't suppress a smile. You're a surprising man, Ike West. Hope that's a good thing. "It is," she assured him, reaching for his hand. "Though I hope your future surprises are less legally questionable." With the divorce proceedings now moving swiftly toward resolution, Isabella and Ike began making plans for their own future. The baby was due in November, and they hoped to be married before its arrival, assuming the divorce was finalized in time. "Nothing fancy," Ike insisted when Flora began enthusiastically planning an elaborate celebration. "Simple ceremony with just our people." Isabella agreed wholeheartedly. "After everything, I just want quiet and peace, and to be your wife without complications or drama." But complications seemed determined to find them. Late one night in mid-October, Isabella was awakened by sharp pains that made her gasp. Too early, she thought in panic. "It's too early. Flora," she called, struggling to sit up. "Flora." The older woman appeared almost instantly, having taken to sleeping lightly since Isabella had entered her final months. One look at Isabella's contorted face told her everything she needed to know. "How far apart are they?" she asked, immediately practical. "Not sure." "Started just now," Isabella gasped as another pain gripped her. "But something's wrong, it's too soon." Flora checked her quickly, her experienced hands gentle but efficient. "Water hasn't broken yet, might be false labor, or might be the real thing coming early." "The baby is going to be fine," Flora assured her firmly, "but I'm sending Miguel for the doctor in Douglas, just to be safe." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and anxiety for Isabella. Ike paced outside her room, refusing to rest despite Flora's insistence that birth could take many hours. By dawn, it was clear this was indeed real labor, progressing rapidly despite being 3 weeks before the expected date. Dr. Samuel Wilson arrived just as the sun was cresting the eastern hills, looking somewhat disheveled from his hasty journey, but alert and professional. After examining Isabella, he emerged to speak with Ike, who had worn a path in the floorboards with his constant pacing. "The baby's coming early but seems to be in good position," the doctor explained. "Mrs. Walker is young and strong. I see no reason to expect complications, though I'll stay until the birth to be certain." Ike nodded, his face drawn with worry. "Can I see her?" Briefly, Dr. Wilson agreed. "She's between contractions now, but that won't last long." Isabella's face lit up when Ike entered her room, despite the pain and exhaustion evident in her features. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "This isn't how we planned it." He took her hand, pressing it gently to his lips. "Don't apologize, just focus on you and the baby. Nothing else matters right now." "If anything happens to me, nothing will happen," he interrupted firmly. "But if it makes you feel better, I promise to look after the child no matter what." As my own tears filled her eyes. "I love you, Ike." "I should have said it before now." A slow smile transformed his worried expression. "I love you too, Isabella, have for a long time now." He brushed a strand of hair from her damp forehead. "Now concentrate on bringing this child into the world. We'll have a lifetime for everything else." The labor progressed rapidly after that. By mid-morning, Isabella's cries had changed in tenor, and Flora emerged briefly to inform Ike that the birth was imminent. He resumed his pacing, joined now by Joseph, Miguel, and Liam, all of whom had abandoned their duties to await news. When the thin, indignant wail of a newborn finally pierced the tense silence, all 4 men froze. Moments later, Dr. Wilson appeared, looking tired but satisfied. "Congratulations," he said to Ike. "Mother and daughter are both doing well despite the early arrival." "Daughter?" Ike repeated, a look of wonder crossing his face. The doctor nodded. "A healthy girl, small but strong. You can see them now, but only briefly. They both need rest." Isabella lay propped against pillows, her face pale but radiant as she cradled a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as Ike entered, and the love in her expression nearly brought him to his knees. "She's perfect," Isabella whispered as he approached cautiously, almost reverently. "Would you like to hold her?" With hands that seemed suddenly too large and clumsy, Ike carefully accepted the newborn. The baby's eyes were closed, her face still red and wrinkled from the birth. a dusting of dark hair visible beneath the small cap Flora had knitted. She was impossibly small, yet somehow complete: tiny fingers, miniature nose, rosebud mouth. "She's beautiful," he murmured, feeling a surge of protectiveness unlike anything he had ever experienced. Just like her mother. Isabella watched them together, her heart so full it seemed it might burst. This man, this good, honorable man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, now held her daughter with such tenderness that it erased any lingering doubts about their future. "What will you name her?" Ike asked, reluctantly returning the baby to her mother's arms. Isabella smiled. "I was thinking of Flora Frances Walker." She paused, then added softly, "Or West, if you're still certain about marrying a ready-made family." "More certain than ever," Ike assured her, leaning down to place a gentle kiss on her forehead, then an equally gentle one on the baby's cap. "Flora Frances West it is." The next few weeks passed in the exhausted, joyful haze familiar to all new parents. Despite her early arrival, little Flora thrived under the devoted care of her mother and the entire West Range family. Flora Mendez proved an invaluable guide to Isabella, offering practical advice without ever overstepping. The divorce decree arrived 3 weeks after the birth, a single document that severed Isabella's last tie to Frank Jenkins and opened the door to her future with Ike. They were married the following Sunday in the small church in Douglas, with Flora and Joseph as witnesses, and baby Flora sleeping peacefully through the entire ceremony. It was, as Ike had requested, a simple affair. Isabella wore a new dress of pale blue that Flora had helped her sew, with tiny white flowers embroidered around the collar. Ike had a new shirt and had actually trimmed his beard for the occasion, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his formal attire but undeniably handsome. The vows they exchanged were traditional but deeply felt, each word weighted with the journey that had brought them to this moment. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ike's kiss was gentle but held a promise of the deeper passion they would share in private. The small reception that followed at the ranch was more lively, with neighboring ranchers and townspeople from Douglas joining to celebrate. Isabella was touched by how completely the community had accepted her, most treating the baby as Ike's own without question or judgment. Late that evening, after the guests had departed and baby Flora had been settled in her cradle for the night, Ike and Isabella stood together on the porch of what was now truly their home. "Happy?" Ike asked, his arm around her waist. Isabella leaned into his embrace, still marveling at how safe she felt there. "More than I ever imagined possible," she admitted. "Are you?" "More than I have words for," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Never thought I'd have this: a family, a woman I love, a child to raise." "Spent too many years alone." "Not anymore," Isabella promised, turning in his arms to face him. "Never alone again." Their kiss deepened, no longer constrained by propriety or circumstance. When they finally parted, breathless, Ike rested his forehead against hers in what had become a familiar gesture of intimacy. "Should check on the baby once more, then get some rest," he suggested, though his eyes conveyed a different message entirely. Isabella smiled, understanding perfectly. "Yes, I think we should." They entered their home hand in hand, husband and wife at last, the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Wyoming sky. 5 years later, Isabella sat on the same porch, watching as Ike taught 5-year-old Flora how to brush her pony, a miniature version of his own horse, specially chosen for her safety and gentle temperament. Beside her, 3-year-old Joseph Isaac West played contentedly with wooden blocks, constructing elaborate buildings that inevitably toppled to his delighted giggles. The ranch had prospered during these years, expanding its boundaries and cattle count under Ike's careful management. The original house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with Flora Mendez maintaining her own comfortable quarters attached to the main building. Isabella's hand rested on her stomach, where the newest West was making his or her presence known with enthusiastic kicks. Due in the fall, this third child would complete their family, at least according to their current plans. "Mama, look," Flora called, beaming with pride as she showed off her brushing technique. "Daddy says I'm a natural." "Wonderful, sweetheart," Isabella called back, smiling at her daughter's enthusiasm. Flora had inherited her mother's dark hair and determination, combined with a sunny disposition that was entirely her own. She adored Ike, following him around the ranch whenever permitted, eager to learn everything about the cattle and horses that were his livelihood. Little Joseph, in contrast, was more contemplative, resembling Ike in both appearance and temperament. He preferred books and building to outdoor adventures, though at 3, he still had plenty of time to develop new interests. Life wasn't without its challenges. Running a ranch in Wyoming territory demanded constant work and vigilance against drought, harsh winters, and occasional trouble with rustlers. But these ordinary difficulties seemed manageable compared to the dangers they had faced in the beginning. Frank Jenkins had never bothered them again, having apparently decided that his freedom from scandal was worth more than revenge. They had heard through Douglas gossip that he had remarried a banker's daughter from Denver and relocated his business interests to Colorado, putting comfortable distance between his new life and his past. Isabella sometimes marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just 6 years. From a trapped, desperate woman fleeing an abusive marriage to a beloved wife and mother, secure in her home and family. The journey had not been easy, but every step had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Ike approached the porch, having left Flora practicing her brushing under Joseph Green's watchful eye. He settled beside Isabella, automatically placing his hand over hers where it rested on her belly. "Active today?" he asked with a smile as he felt a particularly enthusiastic kick. "Very," she confirmed. "I think this one might be a footballer." "Or a bronc rider," Ike suggested, his eyes twinkling. Isabella laughed. "Heaven help us." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children and enjoying the peaceful homestead they had built together. The Wyoming sun cast long shadows as it began its descent toward the western hills, painting the landscape in gold and amber. "Do you ever think about that day?" Isabella asked suddenly. "The day we met," Ike's expression softened. "Often. Can still see you behind that broken wagon, scared but ready to fight." He squeezed her hand gently. "Bravest thing I ever saw. I was terrified," she admitted. "But then you appeared like something out of a dream, my very own knight, though I didn't know it then." "Not a knight," he demurred with typical modesty. "Just a man who couldn't ride past trouble." Isabella turned to face him fully. "You saved me, Ike. In every way a person can be saved. I hope you know that. You saved yourself," he countered. "Had the courage to run, to start over." "I just offered a hand along the way." His blue eyes, still as striking as the day they met though now crinkled at the corners from years of squinting in the sun, held hers steadily. "Besides, you saved me too. How's that, from a life half-lived?" "From loneliness I'd gotten so used to I didn't even recognize it anymore." He gestured toward their children. "Gave me all this. A real home, not just a place to hang my hat." Isabella leaned forward to press a kiss to his lips, still moved by his rare moments of eloquence after all these years. "Then I suppose we saved each other." "Suppose we did," he agreed with a smile, "and continue to do so every day." Little Joseph toddled over to them, arms raised in a silent request to be picked up. Ike obliged, settling the boy on his knee as Flora abandoned her pony lesson to join them on the porch. "Story time, Daddy?" she asked hopefully, her dark eyes so like her mother's wide with anticipation. "Which one tonight?" Ike asked, though he already knew the answer. "The one about how you found Mama," Flora exclaimed, settling beside him on the bench. "It's my favorite." Isabella exchanged an amused glance with her husband. No matter how many times their daughter heard the tale, she never tired of it. Of course, they shared a carefully edited version, appropriate for young ears, focusing on the rescue and journey to West Range rather than the violence and fear of the original events. Well, it was a bright spring morning, Ike began, his arm around Flora's shoulders. I was riding back from town when I spotted a broken-down wagon in the distance. As he continued the familiar story, Isabella watched the faces of her family, her daughter enthralled, despite having heard the tale countless times, her son contentedly playing with a button on his father's shirt. Her husband's expression animated in a way few people besides his family ever witnessed. This was what freedom felt like, she realized. Not just the absence of fear or constraint, but the presence of love, security, and possibility. The broken-down wagon and desperate flight had been just the beginning of a journey that had led her here to this porch, this family, this life built with love and trust. When Ike reached the part of the story where he had offered his hand to the stranded woman and said, "Then you'll come with me," Flora sighed happily, as she always did. And that, Ike concluded, winking at Isabella over their daughter's head, was the beginning of our greatest adventure. Isabella smiled, her heart full to bursting with gratitude for this man and the life they had created together. "And it's still just beginning," she added softly. As the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, the West family remained on their porch, surrounded by the legacy of courage, second chances, and a love that had started with 7 simple words on a dusty trail. "Then you'll come with me."